Good evening. I'm incredibly excited that we're in this season of Lent because this time gives us an opportunity to really focus on our relationship with Christ. I think we all embark on this journey with hope that we'll be changed by Easter. We'll be closer to the Lord at the end than when we started. It's all about growing closer. Closeness to Jesus is the key, because closeness is the key attribute of a disciple. That's what I want to talk about this evening, how we can use this beautiful season of Lent to become better disciples. My guess is, I think we'd all agree that simply having a desire to grow closer to God, and even knowing that it's important, that's not enough to get us there. There's a big difference between believing in Jesus and following him as a true disciple. I'll give you a little example that I think highlights the difference between believing in Jesus and actually being a disciple. I once heard someone explain that when he was growing up, making his way through grade school, all the boys in his class got along, except for one kid who was the strongest, the meanest, who swore the most, loved telling dirty jokes, and was a total bully. Every day he did something to insult, intimidate, or flat out hurt one of his classmates. And at lunch one day, this guy out of the blue just said to the rest of the class that he was a Christian. Well, the guy who was telling the story explained that he started choking on his food because he was laughing so hard. Because the statement about this guy being a Christian was the last thing he'd expect to hear from this kid. Well, the bully was so mad that he was getting laughed at that the bully wanted to beat him up because he thought the other guy thought that he wasn't Christian, right? He wanted to get in a fight to prove that he was Christian. Makes a lot of sense, right? No, right? Totally ironic. Here's what I'd say. The bully very well may have believed in Jesus. He might have believed in everything that Jesus ever taught. But his actions didn't match up with his words. He can claim to be a Christian, but his deeds didn't match up with the identity. To truly be a disciple, it's never enough to claim that we believe in Jesus or call ourselves Christian. Being a disciple requires that we live out what we believe through our deeds and our actions. If we don't act in accord with our belief, the belief will be fruitless. I remember one spring as a kid, I was at the store with my dad. We walked past a display stand that had a bunch of packets of seeds. And immediately the package with the seeds for a tomato plant caught my eye. And I begged my dad, I was like, Dad, can we please get those? Can we grow those in the garden in the backyard? And I was so happy when my dad said yes. Well, then I got home, and I can't tell you what distracted me, but I went off to do other stuff. The seeds didn't get planted that afternoon. They didn't get planted the next day either. And when late summer rolled around, guess what didn't appear anywhere in our garden? No tomatoes. But there was no fruit because the seeds were still in the package. Our faith, everything that we believe in, has unlimited potential for growth and to bring it about, right? Life for both us and for others. But if we have the seeds and never plant them, there's not going to be anything new at harvest time. Again, it means nothing to call ourselves Christians if we don't match our deeds with the identity. So with all that being said, what does it actually mean to be a disciple? What's the duty of a disciple? Mark's gospel tells us that Jesus went up on the mountain and he called to himself those whom he desired, and they came to him. Now, a lot more comes after that, but it is so important to note the first task that Scripture says he called them to. It says that he called them to be with him. The first duty of a disciple is to be with Jesus. And if being a disciple means being with Jesus, then when Jesus goes somewhere, guess what we have to do? We have to follow. So a disciple is one who follows Jesus closely. I want to delve deeper into what it means and what it really looks like to be a disciple by looking at St. Peter. And I'll start by telling you that I love St. Peter. He's one of my favorite saints. And you might be surprised when I tell you the reason why he's one of my favorite saints isn't because he was perfect and always did an incredible job of following Jesus and being a great disciple. I actually love Peter precisely because he didn't always do a great job. He screwed up. He stuck his foot in his mouth all the time. And on plenty of occasions, the rest of the group would have rolled their eyes at him and wondered why Peter just didn't get it yet. I love Peter because he's like me. He shows me that even though I mess up a lot, that God never quits calling me. That God will never look at me and say, you know what? So I've given you a lot of chances, and you just ruined your last one, so quit following me. I don't want you or I don't need you as a disciple anymore. If anyone in the Bible would have been the person that Jesus would have said that to, it would have been Peter. But Jesus never said it. Rather, Jesus called Peter to a great task by putting the leadership of the entire church into his hands. So the first thing I'll say before we even look in depth at his life is we can learn from Peter that being a disciple does not mean that we're perfect and that we always do or say the right things all the time. A disciple is called to follow Jesus, even if they stumble, trip, and fall sometimes as they follow along. Now remember what I said was the first duty of a disciple. It was to be with Jesus. As a disciple, you follow Jesus closely. First thing I'm going to say right now is I am so proud of all of you for being here this evening when you could be out doing other things, right? You chose to be here, which tells me that you desire to follow Jesus closely, to not just have him be something on the fringe of your life. This is so important. And I'm going to explain why by looking at Peter's worst and most devastating moment. Sure, we all know that after the Last Supper, Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane with the apostles, his disciples. And while he was there, he was arrested. The account of this in Luke's gospel is fascinating. And I'll read it from here. It says, they seized Jesus and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. Peter followed. This is great that Peter followed, right? It's what a disciple is supposed to do. But unfortunately, there are three little words that come right after the words Peter followed. It says, Peter followed at a distance. Peter followed at a distance. Again, the first duty of a disciple is to be with Jesus and follow him closely. Peter followed at a distance. And now we're going to see the results of following him at a distance. Continues, it says, when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat amongst them. Then a maid, seeing him as he sat in the lights and gazing at him, said, this man also was with Jesus. But Peter denied it, saying, woman, I do not know him. A little while later, someone else saw him and said, you also are one of them. But he said, I am not. After an interval of about an hour, another insisted, saying, certainly this man also was with him, for he's a Galilean. But Peter said, I do not know what you are saying. And immediately while he was still speaking, the cock crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the words of the Lord, how he said to him, before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Let me tell you right now that denial of Christ, denial through our words or through our actions, is always preceded by distance. If we're going to be a disciple and follow Christ and to be with Christ, we have to follow him closely. And the interesting thing with Peter following a distance is it was actually his MO. in the very beginning of his journey with Christ. We see Peter and a friend of his who've been out fishing all night and caught nothing. Jesus shows up as they're cleaning and closing up shop, and Jesus asks Peter to go out into deep water and lower the nets again. Peter listens, and the nets are filled like never before. And at this point, Peter actually switches from calling Jesus Master to calling him Lord. Like, he gets it now. Well, he only kind of gets it, because what he says is he calls him Lord, he says, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." And at first glance, we could see this as Peter being humble, not deeming himself worthy of being in Jesus' presence. But if we think a little deeper, this is actually the first instance of seeing Peter following Jesus at a distance, right from the start. Essentially saying, "Depart from me," right? Jesus, don't stand so close, because I'm a sinner. He wants distance. He's afraid to be close. Now, why would he be afraid to follow Jesus closely? Probably for the same reasons why we might fear following Jesus closely. Because if we follow him closely, being his disciple, closeness, it may make demands on our lives. And it's hard to give stuff up. He's fearful for the same reasons that we might be a little nervous about Lent. At the same time, we're excited for it. The fact of the matter is, the reason why any of us do anything in life is because we want to be happy. We want to be loved. And somewhere inside of us, we know and we believe that following Jesus, being with him, will bring us happiness. But it can also be difficult to be a disciple, because sometimes remaining close to him means we have to give stuff up. And it's really hard to give up a love of something that you know for a love that to some degree is a mystery, that you're not fully sure how it's going to satisfy. But the reason why we can have confidence and why we need to accept Jesus' invitation to go all in, to decide that this year we're going to have the best Lent ever, is because when Peter told Jesus, "Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man," Jesus didn't say, "Okay, you want me to depart from you? Apparently you're not ready, so I guess I'll just back off and I'll choose someone else. Maybe next Lent, you'll actually be ready to make the real and lasting changes that I'm calling to you in life." No. Jesus did not hesitate for a single second. He didn't let him off the hook. Why? Because Jesus knew that Peter did have what it takes. And the same thing is true for you. Jesus calls you to follow him, to be his disciple by living your faith through deeds and words and actions. He does so because he knows what you're capable of, even if you don't know it, even if you don't believe it. So when Peter said, "Depart from me," Jesus' response, he said, "Be not afraid." And then he gave him a mission. And Jesus, he wants to say the same exact thing to your heart right now, to be not afraid. Shortly after this, Jesus revealed to Peter he would be the first pope. He'd lead the entire church. And the beautiful thing is Jesus did this and called him to this, all the while knowing that down the road, Peter would deny him. Jesus did not wait for Peter to be perfect before calling him to be a major disciple. And he doesn't wait to call you to follow him either. What I think is super important for us to realize is that good leaders, I will even say great leaders, they have successes and failures all the time. Great leaders fail often. Why? Because they put themselves out there and they try new things. And as you're trying new things, some will work great and others won't. But they learn from those failures. The only way to never fall is to never get up and to try to climb. But we're called to climb to great heights with and for the Lord. So falling and not being perfect doesn't mean we're a bad disciple. A lot of times it probably just means that we're putting ourselves out there like Peter did. After all, there was another time when Jesus was walking on the water, and Peter asked Jesus if he could come walk on the water where Jesus was. That's pretty bold. And in the end, Peter fell. But before he fell, he actually did it. The scriptures say Peter walked on water. And being a disciple means following Jesus closely. And when Jesus is on the water, Peter wanted to follow so closely that he himself asked to follow him out onto the water. Peter was doing an incredible job, even though following this way would have seemed impossible. And I have to say again, the reason why I love Peter so much is because he's real. I love him because he wasn't perfect, because that means I have a chance. Now, I know I've been bouncing around in Peter's story, but I want to come to the end, right after Jesus rose from the dead. Meaning it was also right after Peter had been following at a distance and denied Jesus 3 times. Well, Jesus appeared to Peter and the other disciples, and after eating a meal together, Jesus pulls Peter aside. And I'm sure Peter might have been thinking, uh-oh, I'm busted. That wasn't the case at all. Jesus looked at him and said, Peter, do you love me? Peter said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Then Jesus said a second time, Peter, do you love me? And Peter again said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Finally, Jesus said a third time, Peter, do you love me? And Peter said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. At that point, Peter realized Jesus was giving him a chance to respond with love to make up for the fact that he had denied him. And not only denied him, but done so at the precise moment when Jesus needed him most. In other words, Jesus was giving him another chance after he had failed him to the highest degree. You know what? Jesus does the same exact thing with us. He always offers us another chance. Maybe you've had some mediocre Lents before. Well, Jesus has given you another chance. And maybe the key to having a great Lent is going to be allowing Jesus to ask you each morning, do you love me? And then you in turn can respond with your actions throughout the day. I'm sure we can all formulate the words with our mouth and we can all say, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. But the question is, will we show it? So back to the story, Peter, after letting Jesus pick him back up, he went on to lead the church and bring so many people to believe in Jesus and become disciples themselves. He was incredible. He was exactly who God called him to be. Eventually, he made his way to Rome, the capital of the world at the time. And while he was there, a huge persecution of Christians broke out. And of course, the easiest way to get rid of a group of people is to eliminate their leader, which meant that Peter is in serious danger. So Peter, being Peter, he decided it was time to get out of town, run away, to put distance between himself and the suffering and the hardship he saw on the horizon. So he headed out. He made it outside the main city gates and was just entering the countryside, having successfully made his escape, when he saw a vision of Jesus walking towards him on the road from the opposite direction. Jesus is walking in towards Rome as Peter's walking away. And when they came upon each other, Peter said, Domine, quo vadis, which means, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus said to him, Peter, I'm going back into Rome to be crucified again. And at that moment, Peter realized that Jesus was inviting him to go back into Rome, to lead and to guide the church, and to not be afraid if he was captured, it would end up giving his life. So Peter turned around and he went back into Rome, and after this was in fact captured and condemned to death by crucifixion. And Peter, not believing himself to be worthy to die in the same way as Jesus, he specifically requested to be crucified upside down. And that request was granted. What is so beautiful about Peter's docility in this moment is it's the complete opposite of the reaction that he had had years before when Jesus first predicted his own passion and death. When Jesus had told his group of disciples that he was going to go to Jerusalem, where he would be arrested, mocked, and killed. And Peter's immediate reaction was to say in front of everyone, no, Lord, this will never happen to you. And Jesus looked right at Peter and said, get behind me, Satan. Those are really strong words. My guess is Peter didn't want that to happen to Jesus, both because of his love for his friend, but also because if he's supposed to follow Jesus closely, and that happens to Jesus, What does that mean for Peter? Well, fast forward some 30 years, and Peter himself literally turned his response upside down as he hung upside down on the cross. In that moment, following Jesus closer than ever before. My dear brothers and sisters, we are privileged to have Jesus call us to be his disciples. It is a gift to us for him to desire to walk so closely with us. But what we have to realize is Jesus never forces us to receive this gift. Because discipleship requires love, and love can't be forced. You and I, we have to daily choose to walk with Jesus. We have to daily plant the seeds so the fruit can grow. It's my hope that seeing the very real, human, and sometimes messy example of how Peter became a disciple of Jesus and how he lived as a disciple can help you on your journey. Specifically, the Lenten journey we're in the middle of. I want this Lent to be epic. I want it to be life-changing for you. I want nothing more than for you to stare down the biggest obstacle that is present between you and a life-giving relationship with the Lord and to face it head-on with Jesus by your side. I know sometimes it can be easy to avoid going at it full bore because we're afraid of trying and failing. But Peter shows us we don't have to be afraid to fall. Don't fear not following Jesus perfectly. Don't think that you have to be someone else before Jesus will call you and desire to use you. Jesus is calling you right now. Right now, tonight, from the Eucharist, Jesus is asking you, do you love me? Right now, Jesus is asking you to step out of the boat and walk on water as his disciple. Be not afraid to take the next step towards Christ and to walk the journey of discipleship and the life of love that you were created for. Now, I'm not going to give you any specific things that I'm going to ask you to do during Lent because all of us are in different places. We're all dealing with different situations and personalities and struggles. But Jesus knows who you are. He knows right where you're at. And from the beginning of time, and honestly, even before the beginning of time, he knew you'd be sitting here tonight, just as you are, with your strengths and your weaknesses. And he's been looking forward to walking this journey with you all that time. To help you to discern where God might be calling you and the precise way in which he desires for you to live out your discipleship and the way in which he calls you to follow him closely, I'm going to ask you, as we conclude, to imagine a scenario. I want to ask you to take a moment, close your eyes, listen and envision what I'm saying. What if for one day Jesus were to become you? What if for 24 hours Jesus wakes up in your bed, walks in your shoes, lives in your house, assumes your schedule? Your boss becomes his boss, your mother becomes his mother, your pains become his pains. With one exception, nothing about your life changes. Your health doesn't change, your circumstances don't change, your schedule isn't altered, your problems aren't solved. Only one change occurs. What if, for one day and one night, Jesus lives your life with his heart? Your heart gets the day off, and your life is led by the heart of Christ. His priorities govern your actions. His passions drive your decisions. His love directs your behavior. What would you be like? Would people notice a change? Your family, would they see something new? Your coworkers, would they sense a difference? What about the less fortunate? Would you treat them the same? And your friends, would they detect more joy? How about your enemies? Would they receive more mercy from Christ's heart than from yours? And you, how would you feel? What alterations would this transplant have on your stress level, your mood swings, your temper, Would you sleep better? Would you see sunsets differently? Death differently? How about your reaction to traffic delays? Would you still dread what you're dreading? Better yet, would you still do what you're doing? Would you still do what you have planned to do for the next 24 hours? Pause and think about your schedule, obligations, engagements, outings, appointments. With Jesus taking over your heart, would anything change? Keep working on this for a moment. Adjust the lens of your imagination until you have a clear picture of Jesus leading your life. And then snap the shutter and frame the image. What you see is what God wants. He wants for you to think and to act like Jesus. My dear brothers and sisters, I'll finish by simply inviting you to spend some time in prayer, in beautiful, life-giving conversation with the Lord. And in this time, talk with him about what specific things you can do in order to make that vision, that image, that snapshot of Jesus living in you, living your life. What things you can do to make that notion a reality. The important thing to know is that Jesus' presence, it is already reality. He already lives within you. You simply have to make choices each day to let his heart take the reins. So know of my prayers for you, that I pray that your Lent might be a journey of true discipleship as you seek to follow Jesus so closely that his heart beats in union with yours.